Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of The Retired Astronaut. I'm your host, Patal Mani, and today's subject, Standing Rock. A day of giving thanks for Standing Rock. Actually, I could devote my whole life to giving thanks to Standing Rock. Were you all following what was going on around this time last year? Today, I just want to do, as an expression of gratitude for all of those two-leggeds and winged ones and four-leggeds who showed up in spirit, in the flesh, to, I believe, in one regard, protect and preserve the spirit of Turtle Island, especially considering the timing post-election and the tension and anxiety that was being expressed, which led me personally to, as I was in a state of very focused health and well-being, having needed to give that to myself, taken some time off from, taking the semester off from school, quit my job in order to really take care of myself, and then the election. Now, I was following Standing Rock online, friends of mine, people I know on Facebook who were posting about it, and some of the independent media sources. And so I was aware, and then after the election, I just was like, there's just too much fear and, to plug into, and it's really not interesting to plug into that. Not in my moving forward by choosing more life-affirming subject matter in which to focus my attention. I immediately turned my thoughts, my prayers to Standing Rock. And as things were developing, especially last November, especially moving up toward Thanksgiving, and especially as the veterans were preparing to depart and unmask and to show their support, and that was leading up to my birthday, and there was concern for their well-being, and then blizzards, and then every day for me, because I actually had the space, the psychic space, the physical space, the emotional space, to care, not only to really care for myself at a time when that was very needed, but also it allowed me the spiritual space to hold, this prayer for Standing Rock ongoing with every breath, throughout the day, and it was, and it is still this incredible connection because I grew up along the Missouri River. I was born very near to the river, played at the river as a child, along the railroads, and when I grew up, we read stories of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and things like that, and so those things are a part of my childhood, and the river and what it provided for the community in which I lived in. Actually, it's turning at some point, which created a greater urban development elsewhere, and so the town where I grew up remained small, and so there's this connection to my own ancestry within these waters, and then if you ever look at how regions were typically colonized, throughout the colonizing years, these riverways that would lead to the oceans were the very most important. So when the Europeans were sending their explorers out or whatever, they would be, like Lewis and Clark is a very good example. They would, instruct them to follow the river until it hits the ocean, and when it hits the ocean, then you need to, then within that area, then you need to go carve, into a stone, that you were there first, because the European nations would come and make these claims. And then as things progressed, and things became legal battles, then it became important that you put a fort there and you have an actual, physical presence of people in order to, make your claim for the territory, which actually had a lot of people already living on it and doing so well and in such great harmony, the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, that Europeans thought nobody lived here. This is a framing of the narrative that a dear, beloved mentor and friend of mine, she uses this when she's speaking to audiences, to European audiences, in an effort to extend a palm, extend a hand in peace and race reconciliation. So I use that quote in honor of her and her incredible influence in my life, and helping me to change widen my perspective, my viewpoint, and she was integral in allowing me to work on her projects that put me at the feet of many of an amazing Native elder sharing their oral histories and their stories. So being in the field and doing this type of research, learning these stories, learning more of the indigenous perspective and what it means to live an indigenous life. Things that all of us, every one of us, can connect to because of our connection to the earth, our connection to each other, our connection to the greater cosmos. So I was going through a media fast. After the election, I can highly recommend media fasts for folks. I mean, I'm a media maker, and I highly recommend it. I have a couple of instances, where I've done this before. After my first election, I voted. My first presidential election I ever voted in was George Bush #1 and Dukakis, and I was excited about Geraldine Ferraro and having a woman vice president, a woman in the White House. That was exciting to me. And then when he lost, I was just like, oh my God, it had been 8 years of Reagan, and I was really ready for, a new chapter, and that's just not what was being presented. It just seemed like more of the same, and so I stopped paying attention at that point, and I turned my attention to the media goings on and all that, and I turned my attention to my community, I turned my attention to my friends, and I turned my attention to myself and my own artistry and my own development as a human being. And maybe like a year or so passed, and I remember I was like in a bar with some friends, like getting a sandwich or something, and something came up on the TV. I don't really hang out in bars or sports bars or whatever, but I was just there getting lunch, and so something came up on the TV, and they made mention of who the president was, and I was just like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten. Okay, and this isn't like a heavy drug period at all. In fact, I was pretty much really totally sober almost. Every now and then I'd maybe drink something. No, having forgotten that he was, the president felt really good, because I didn't spend all this time and energy, worried about, like feeding into these systems of fear. And so then, I ended up getting, once Clinton got elected or whatever, the politics became more interesting to me until the Lewinsky thing. And I had relocated to the West Coast, and I was, again, focused on a health issue where I was just like, all my attention was on, well-being and taking good care of myself. And then I had moved, and so there was everything having to do with the move. A lot going on. Media fast, not going to help. So I'm going to turn my attention elsewhere. I'm going to turn my attention to things that are life-affirming, that are loving, that are rejuvenating, that are renewing, affirming, focus on health, focus on well-being, connection, community, self-love, self-care, diet, nutrition, meditation, a lot of stuff. was getting acupuncture, I was doing Tai Chi, I was just really focused on my well-being, not paying attention to what was going on politically. And I also noticed too that I was still informed, even by not actively seeking it out. I knew what was going on because I'd be at work and somebody'd have the radio on and there'd be a newscast. I'm not actively seeking it out. I would encounter these environments where news would kind of come in, and I would get little snippets here and there, and I found that it was enough to, if somebody got me into a conversation, I'd be like, yeah, I just or heard people talking about the news or whatever. I'm like, no, I caught up with all that because I've been aware, paying attention. It was less about no, don't show me the news, and more of just like not really interested. However, I might cross the street and there would be a newspaper headline, and okay, there it is. All right, there, I read it. Okay, now I know that little snippet. Whatever. All right, moving on. So recently did that again, and I highly recommend it. And so during this whole period, this media fast, especially after the election, I went to Christmas dinner, sat around a table with people, who were learned, intelligent, educated people who followed, current events. I knew everything they were talking about. I even corrected somebody on a very erroneous fact. So you can do this if you have that fear that you're going to be missing out on something. You will likely be surprised. A child is born. Standing Rock. So one of the most amazing things is I had the pleasure of meeting this woman in Portland, and she is absolutely delightful, and the circumstances of our meeting wonderful, a mutual friend, and we would occasionally encounter each other in transit, and friends on Facebook, and she's a granddaughter of one of the founders of Wisdom of the Elders, and also an elder to which his lineage I owe an incredible. I am humbled at the gifts that his lineage of knowledge have been shared with me. His granddaughter she's so amazing. She's absolutely amazing. And she was there, and she was, she showed up at Standing Rock, ready to have a baby, and she just kind of went in, had the baby. She has a few kids, so she knew the drill. So named I think the child's name in Lakota is Minnie Wachosene, which to life, water is life. The sacredness of water. So sacred waters, sacred water. Isn't that great? Isn't that amazing? That's so cool. And so I'm glad to see, because she doesn't blast us all over the stuff. So it's been a really sweet thing, because now she'll post some photos of the child that's growing quickly, and the anniversary's coming up. So happy birthday. That's just so beautiful. So there were actually, speaking of a child is born, there are prophecies that were referred to during Standing Rock for those who were unawares. But maybe prophecy isn't the best word to use. Rather, these were visions, by medicine people. One of which was the black snake, coming across Turtle Island that would need to be, interrupted, by Native people, and specifically by Native people coming together, across cultures, tribes and bands, and families and communities. And it was a time also described, or this might be a separate vision, but I believe these may be working together. They were both referenced in what material I came across. The condor and the eagle fly together, the eagle representing the medicines of the northern hemisphere, the condor, the medicines of the south, and the tribes, the people, the medicines, the cultures, coming together, flying together. And truly, there were, if you were following, there were indigenous peoples coming from all over the globe, to show their support. There were hundreds and hundreds of flags flying, which was also kind of, interesting because you have the whole, if you understand colonization and flags, or if you've ever seen the Eddie Izzard, stand-up routine around, do you have a flag? So the fact that, all these nations, but it is this really stunning, visual presentation where you can just look across and see the unity of peoples, of indigenous peoples coming together. Fascinating. And then the grandmothers and the women of the tribe of at Standing Rock who held press conferences and spoke of their actions as really prayer. They're like, this is prayer. Without not the focus so much on the resistance, but more focus on, you have to understand, we're like holding this energy. We're envisioning this, and everything is coming and coalescing and being created around the vision itself. It was absolutely so beautiful and wonderful to see indigenous women, especially in the Lakota tradition. My teachers have told me the grandmothers were always running things. Do not even kid yourself that they were. They just are. They were. That's just how it is. They would put chiefs in power. If the tribe's decimated, they make sure it gets repopulated. They're the ones that carry the culture forward. There's societies of women that take these responsibilities very seriously, the tribes don't go to war without these societies of women saying it's okay. So here you have the leadership, the women of the Lakota and this band that was at Standing Rock coming forward, being visible, and that honestly was and I don't know that everybody saw this. I mean, it was visible to me. I mean, because it came across a press conference that they held. I mean, they held several. There was one in particular that I was very moved by. So thank you, grandmothers. Thank you, grandmothers, so much for your leadership and your vision and your prayers that rescued. It continues to rescue, preserve, and save, the spirits here on Turtle Island of not just the two-leggeds, but all beings, Matakuyoyas, and all my relations. So, thank you, grandmothers. Unshimaka. Thank you, Pilame, for such an extraordinary demonstration of the power of prayer and of the power of the indigenous spirit. And on that note, and in closing, for those of you who are watching this and you're there to this point, I would encourage you, if you've not already engaged, to explore, contemplate your indigenous identity. If you think of yourself as non-indigenous, then you're thinking non-indigenously, okay? All of us are indigenous to this earth, and becoming an indigenous person, if you were not born into it, it is something that you can discover. You can discover it in many, many different ways. It does not require appropriating anyone else's culture, because you can explore your own lineage. You can explore through DNA and ancestry and genealogy where your peoples come from, what their traditions were, how they worshipped, how they lived, how they loved, what moved them to migrate, what had to converge from all these different places to bring yourself into existence. Remove through this process ideas of your identity and yourself that have been placed upon you by the culture. Reclaim your sense of space and being and time here and now as being in unity with this planet and with all of her children. When you are able to see yourself in that way, you are now operating from an indigenous worldview. Your choices change. Your way of being changes. And it's an unfolding, it's a never-ending process of discovery And all of our paths are so unique and special, and it's an honor to be able to share my story with you and for you to receive it. And in your receiving of this story, I offer you my blessings to you upon your journey. Namaste. And Pelame, grandmothers, grandfathers, all my relations, to Standing Rock. Pelame.